Well, hello everyone, and welcome to February. Can y'all believe it? Can y'all believe we are in February? We have got a great program for you tonight, but as always, I always have to thank the team. So that would be Tom Roth with our CTSI, Courtney Hayes with our Pepper Center on Aging, and Audrey Belfaro with our ADRC. And before we get started, I want to share something with y'all that's kind of close to home. Y'all may remember several months back, we had Lindsay Stroud, who is chair of our dermatology, do a talk on skin cancer. And so I was paying attention and I noticed a little bump that didn't look quite right on the back of my hand. And I went to my dermatologist and they did a biopsy and found out that it was skin cancer. So it was squamous type of skin cancer. And I had surgery for it last week. They got it all. Life is good. I'm going to have a great scar. I've got to come up with a much better story. I'm thinking somehow I got wrestling with I don't know, bobcat or grizzly bear or something. But anyway, I just want to please remind y'all to take extra special care checking our skin, because I'm so good about putting sunscreen all over, but I like to work in the yard. It gets my hands wet and I'm forever washing them. And so must have just washed off that sunscreen when I shouldn't have. But anyway, just a little PSA to please, please, please take care of our skin. And actually the dermatology surgeon that did this for me, I was telling her about AgingWell because, you know, I tell everybody about it. And she's going to do a session for us either in April or May. So you will get to hear from the woman who did such a beautiful job taking care of me. So on to tonight's program. We have got such a fun program for you tonight. And first of all, our chef is from Graylyn. His name is Christopher Fulk, F-U-L-K. And he had the most delicious meal that he's going to share with you tonight. It is grilled scallops with sweet potato risotto. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Chef and let him show us the way.
Thanks, Deb. It's great to be a part of Aging Well. So you know, I'm Chris from Graylyn Estate, and we're going to cook one of our popular dishes, scallop risotto. And it's our specialty. It's a sweet potato risotto. And a lot of people ask me about scallops because they can be difficult to cook, but once you learn how to cook them properly, you'll always cook them properly. But first of all, risotto takes quite a bit of time to cook, so we'll start that one first. You want to start with a pan, or a pot, excuse me, with some olive oil. Get that a little warm. And I always like to put shallots in my risotto. A simple way to cut it, take it with a shallot or any size onion, cut them in half, and then cut into them. And then cut down. And then you can cut perfectly even diced up onions, shallots. You can do it with garlic. It's a little bit harder with the garlic, but get perfect cuts. And once your oil gets a little warm, put your shallots in. And you want to caramelize those a little bit. Just get a lot of the moisture out of them. You don't want them to turn brown. You want them to stay clear. So if they're brown, it kind of sticks out in the risotto. And risotto is actually arborio rice, which mainly comes from Italy. There are hybrids that are grown here in North America, a lot actually in South Carolina, which is nearby. So, but the best, highest quality arborio rice does come from Italy. So you can find it at any grocery store, but you'll get a better quality one at a specialty food market. And once you sweat your shallots a little bit, add your arborio rice. Stir it around so the oil really coats it. And then you're going to start adding your liquid. And it's basically a 3-to-1 ratio of liquid to the rice. And you can do any kind of liquid you want. It can be a mixture of water and white wine. We're going to use vegetable stock. If you want a real seafood-based one, you can use like a lobster stock or a shrimp stock, anything like that. A base that you buy at the grocery store, court bouillon, anything. But if you really want just plain rice, you can do it with water. But most people do it with some sort of flavored stock. And with it, you want to add a little bit at a time. So it mixes in and you're constantly stirring. Like usually when you cook rice, you just pot full of water, fill it up. This, you do a little bit and let the arborio absorb the liquid, and then you'll add a little bit more, constantly stirring, and just keep doing that until you've reached that 3-to-1 and proper consistency of the rice. So it depends on how much you're making, but I mean, like here at the restaurant, we're making a huge batch. You can be sitting here stirring for 30 minutes. But normally for a batch at home, it takes about 15 minutes. But really, you do not want to leave it like you would a regular pot or, Uncle Ben's or whatever with the lid on. You want to keep stirring it. It'll cook unevenly. You'll get clumps. That's why you're always messing with it. And just, once it is all absorbed, just add a little bit more. And you'll keep cooking it until you'll get a consistency that'll look like this. It's very sticky when it's at room temperature. So if you're not eating it all at your meal and you want to save it, you put it in the refrigerator and it'll come out like this. And you put it back into a pan or a pot and just add a little bit more liquid to it, and it'll bring it right back like it's good as new. So as you're cooking it, as you get near the end of cooking it, if you want, you can add butter to it or any other flavoring. Like we have one dish coming up we're serving soon for a special, which is going to be a saffron risotto. So we'll add the saffron near the end. You don't want to add it too early. You really want that rice to absorb the stock and get to the right consistency before you add in any other flavors. But to keep this really healthy, we're not going to add the butter to it. We are going to flavor this one with sweet potatoes. And basically, we just made your regular mashed sweet potatoes. You just steam them or roast them, whichever you like. I personally prefer roasting them. I think it just brings out so much more flavor. But whatever's easier for you, and then just mash them up. And if you want, you can add anything to it. You know, some people like cinnamon or brown sugar. Some people like butter. Maple syrup, whatever. Or you can just, we leave them plain here, and then, because we use it for different projects around the kitchen. So this is just plain mashed sweet potatoes. Okay, so we're getting close there. So next, we'll talk about the scallops. We use U10 scallops, which are about the biggest you can get at a grocery store or a seafood market. You always want to buy dry scallops. Don't buy frozen scallops. There's too much moisture trapped in there, and with the ice, creates ice crystals. So when you thaw it out, a lot of that water still stays in there. It does not all evaporate out of the scallop. You want a nice dry scallop. Like I said, U10s are my favorite. They're the largest. But most of the size you're going to find at a grocery store somewhere usually be 10, 20. And that's the size of them per pound. So U10 there's no more than 10 per pound. And then 20, there's in between 10 and 20 per pound. They do the same thing with shrimp too. So when you're searing scallops, this is where a lot of people have problems. So when you get your pan, make it nice and, get your oil in there, get it nice and hot. That'll keep it from sticking. So yes, preheat the pan. I do a little salt and pepper. And that with any seafood, when you're going to sear it, salmon, sea bass, scallops, if you want to get a nice sear on it, put a little salt and pepper on it. It'll help it when it hits the pan. And also, lots of times people don't let it sit there and sear long enough. You're going to get most of the cooking done with your sear. So that's another reason you want to get that pan nice and hot. Because scallops really cook pretty fast. So while that's getting that sear, you see risotto is coming together. All that liquid has been absorbed. This one we can add the sweet potato. And just do 1 spoonful at a time. And that way you can make it as potatoey as you want. And usually when you're cooking with seafood, you want a special seafood spatula. Something that's got holes in it or indentions. So it helps when you're scooping it up that it doesn't stick to your pan or a grill. You can definitely do this on a grill. Most home grills have very small little grates, so you want to use a larger scallop. But they definitely grill. They can be, and you don't even have to do them in a pan. You can roast them. Just put them in a broiler. Make sure you have plenty of oil on it so they don't dry out in that hot heat. But you can see you get nice caramelization on them. And basically, they are already done. Even the large U10 scallops cook really, really fast. And some people, you really don't want to overcook scallops. And most people do overcook scallops. Like I said, that was just less than 2 minutes. You sear it on the top for about 90 seconds, and then you flip it, and it only needs like another 30 seconds. If you've got that pan nice and hot. And that's really going to trap that natural moisture in there, and it's going to be very delicious and juicy and just perfect. You really want to do them kind of a medium. You don't want to overcook them. Well done. Then they become too chewy. Everybody's had too chewy scallops. It's just not very delicious. So, as you can see, I've added some of the sweet potato in, but I think it needs more. And you can add just as much as you want, but and you're just going to keep stirring that up. This is also, like I said, when you would add butter if you wanted or anything else. This is when you'll add your salt and pepper. Salt and pepper to taste. So this is a good amount of sweet potato for my liking. Make a nice, any size plate, whatever you would like. Oh, we also add, which I think this is really good flavoring for sweet potatoes, is fresh sage. So I can put some fresh sage in there. But, I mean, you could even, it would completely change the flavor of the dish, but you could do dill, or oregano would go very well with it also. But something about sweet potatoes and sage, in my opinion, go very well. And you don't want your risotto to be too runny. I've been to restaurants where it's like almost in a puddle, and that just means they get way too much liquid in it. And we just, and you can plate it however you like, but we take the scallops. Three scallops like that. And if you won't, because I think all risotto needs cheese on it. So I think a great addition to this dish is fresh pecorino. I think pecorino goes well with both scallops and with risotto, and in fact with the sweet potato too, but especially scallops. It's the brininess and the sweetness of the cheese. It's got a little bit of a tartness to it, much more than a Parmesan. So we just do a little fresh grated pecorino cheese. And we have our scallop risotto. And if you'd like to try this dish or any one of our other dishes here, just come visit us at Graylyn Estate and join us for dinner.
You know, Graylyn is such a fun place, and they always have consistently really good items on the menu. So I would encourage you to visit the restaurant out at Graylyn the next chance you get. And speaking of encouraging you to do fun things, this is a new store, relatively new store in Winston-Salem. It's called XO Life Curated. It's one door down from Moselle's on 4th Street, but Farrell Barton Blake is he's the owner of this store, and he's the gentleman who's going to show us floral design. But his store is so much fun just to wander through. He has got things from all over the world that he curates himself. And so the next time you're out and have a little bit of time to kill, I would strongly encourage you to go in there and just wander. You will get the best ideas. But for now, Farrell is going to show us how to make beautiful floral arrangements with grocery store flowers and things you can find in your yard.
Hey Deb, it's great to see you today at XO Life Curated and to be a part of AgingWell. Today I'm going to show you some floral arranging since it's coming up to Valentine's Day, and I'm going to show you some unusual things that you can add in. You can forage in your own yard for things. So I often use odd objects to put my arrangements in, like I have a soup tureen that I did, and today we're going to take a vintage teapot, which a lot of us have in the cupboard or the attic. I'm going to take a flower frog, which is a great little thing, or a lot of the Japanese use these a lot, but they hold the stems. I'm going to drop this in so it'll give us a spot that the flowers can hold on to when we do the arrangement. One thing I love to do is when I'm going through Whole Foods is look at great things. Today they had some great dark kale, which has just incredible texture. And so I'm going to use this as a base to start the arrangement. And I've already kind of pre-cut all the lower leaves off the stem so it keeps anything from making the water dirty. Always cut on an angle It lets the water really flow into the objects, the flowers and foliage you're using. I tend to start off with my greens first, and then I add the flowers after that. And I just love the crunchy texture of this. And the color is really really dramatic. And then I'm going to take these great, big, beautiful roses. These are garden roses. And what I like about them is they just have a little flit to the petals themselves, which is nice. And I always put a tissue or paper down when I'm cutting. It makes it easy cleanup when you're doing it in your kitchen. And if there's any, like when roses travel, a lot of times you'll get this little brownness to the outer leaf. You can always just take it, curl it down, and then just do a really hard little tug at the bottom and remove the leaf. Because they often do that just because of the travel of where they've been grown and when they get here. And it's a great little just prep thing. So don't be afraid to do it. And I tend to work with odd numbers. So when I'm working with the flowers, I'm always looking at, you know, starting with something and then adding it from there. So I do 3, 5, 7s. So. Up. Like I'm going to add this probably to 5 of these color roses, and then I'm going to start adding the ranunculus and the greens in. It's more about like, because I'll turn this in a minute, and then I'm going to turn this around to put the other roses in, and then you'll start to see how it kind of fills out naturally. It's more about like, I tend to always want some height changes, just like you can see in the one that's already done in the bowl. You can see that it starts with a higher thing and then it works down to kind of come back down to the soup tureen itself. So it depends on how dramatic you want it to be, is what that really comes down to. But I just love how big and open these are. And I prepped my roses a full day and a half in advance. So I did... when you get a rose in, always dethorn it, so you clean that stem up as much as you can. And now I'm going to move into adding some beautiful ranunculus. And I'll be right back on screen. So ranunculus are beautiful. They have that beautiful soft tissue-like quality to them. They are a little top heavy because of the blossom, so always try to give them a little support around them in the arrangement, which is why I put the kale in first. And ranunculus will start to be in season in about a month and a half here in Winston. But you often see them at most of the grocery stores, have them in from Ecuador or Colombia right now. I saw them, they had them at Whole Foods, and I'm sure Publix has them also. They often have them at Trader Joe's right now. And often when you buy, you know, the flowers from the grocery stores, make sure that you just get a variety, because it's so pretty just to mix them up. So if you like the color palette of a certain color palette, then buy flowers on the color palette. Or if you like a little drama, then go for something dark, medium, and light. And then you can work the arrangement that way. And you just kind of like naturally, you know, I'm not a florist, I'm just a designer who likes fresh flowers. So how I learned to arrange was just to let the flowers kind of organically guide you, because they will. You'll know when they're placed in a spot they like. And I always just start off, and then I just slowly add in. So like as you can see, this is starting to fill in really quickly on this. And then the next step I like to add in is something of contrast on the greens. So I'm going to add in some of this, which is beautiful, and adds just that beautiful bright green against that dark kale. And it starts to fill the gaps with the arrangement, which you'll see in a minute when I turn this around. And don't be afraid to just play around with different things. It's all about color and texture and variety when you're doing a flower arrangement. And there really aren't any, major rules in my opinion. I mean, again, I'm not a licensed florist, so they might take offense to that, but I was raised on a farm, and we had what we called a flower bed that we used to just do our arrangements from all the time. They were grown just to cut them, a cutting garden. And there's so many things you can cut in your own yard right now, which is amazing in this area because we're a warmer climate. So you have magnolia leaves right now, you have the holly, the berries, so you can really mix those in to the arrangement. And I like to mix different size and different of the roses, from the really big ones to the smaller ones to the ranunculus, because it has a nice migration in the finished look. And what's nice is, again, I at Whole Foods today, I looked at what they had. They have great tulips, they had roses, they had greens, which are sold separately in the top rack. So it's easy to kind of add in things from both the produce section with the herbs and the kale, and then just mix in additional greens from just the standard bunch of flowers and the greens that are offered. And that's how you get a lovely little teapot. And the other thing we could do, like if you don't have a lot of flowers and you're doing a Valentine's party for two, I'm going to do champagne flutes and then do just a really quick, simple arrangement of doing that. And I always clean as I go. I wish I did the same at home. Just take 2 champagne flutes you have at home. And I'm going to use some of the things that was foraged just outside. And I'm going to use that as a base of adding the little red berries in and using those in there as texture and interest. With these, I already pre-trimmed the lower leaves off of them, knowing I was putting them in water. And then I rinsed the whole leaf, the whole branch in water to get all the dust off because they've been outside. And then you'll always need to cut off some of some of the leaves are damaged, just trim them off and you won't even notice that they're missing in the arrangement. And you can always just trim additional leaves off just so it doesn't get too thick into the glass. And again, these were just foraged right outside my store around the parking lot. And now I'm going to add in some beautiful pink roses into this. And this is super great because this type of arrangement doesn't take a lot of, flowers to really fill it up. And these are really thick stem roses today, so it's going to take even less to fill it up. And you can start, and then you start to realize, like, okay, something's a little floppy. Just pull it back out, cut it back down, and put it back in. And that's a really simple champagne flute arrangement. And you've seen some really quick ways to use ingredients and that are somewhat unusual and readily available. And you can forage in your yard, you can forage in your neighborhood, you can put them in odd containers like a bowl tureen and a teapot, and you can just do one classic flower, which is always so stunning. Yeah. And just have fun with it. Again, there aren't any rules. You'll have fun with it. You'll love it. And again, I'm Farrell Barton Blake at XO Life Curated, 868 West 4th, Winston-Salem. Look forward to meeting you.
I was so inspired watching him put those arrangements together so quickly, so easily. So that is what I'm going to do for Valentine's on Friday. So anyway, I hope y'all enjoyed those. And now we are going to move into the educational part of tonight. And I'm so excited to have Dr. Brady Workman. He is an audiologist here with Atrium Health, Wake Forest Baptist. And his talk is Aging with Your Ears. And this is something that I think a lot of us overlook when we're talking about aging, how critical having good hearing is, both to every part of us. I was thinking about our tagline for Aging Well is healthy body, healthy brain. And hearing well is so critical for both of these. So without further ado, I'm turning it over to Dr. Workman, and we are ready to learn from you.
All right, thank you, Deb. I will share my slides here. Okay. So you may not be aware, but hearing loss is quite prevalent. It's estimated to impact about 15% of Americans, and the likelihood of hearing loss only rises with advanced age. To put that into perspective, another chronic health condition like diabetes only impacts about 11% of Americans. So there's a lot of people out there with hearing difficulty. Despite the high prevalence of hearing loss, less than 25% of individuals that could benefit from hearing aids actually utilize them. I think that's probably a multifactorial issue, possibly related to the expense of the devices or access, possibly even poor fitting techniques, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. So we're first going to dive into some about our hearing system, types of hearing loss, and we'll also do some talking about the balance half of the ear too, which is often forgotten about. Really to understand the different types of hearing loss, you have to understand some of the ear anatomy. So when you look at this picture of the ear we have here, the part of the ear we're used to really all referring to is the outer ear, or the pinna. Its main job really is to capture sound and to funnel that sound into the ear canal, and that sound then hits the eardrum, which then vibrates three little bones in the middle ear system called your ossicles. And those ossicles push into the fluid-filled inner ear, and inside of that inner ear cochlea, you actually have little nerve endings or hair cells that catch the incoming sound and relay that information to the auditory nerve, which relays the information up to the brain for perception. So we have three main types of hearing loss. A sensory neural hearing loss is by far the most prevalent hearing loss type. And that's what you see with noise exposure, aging, genetics, certain conditions. And that refers to a loss impacting the inner ear structures, the hair cells or the nerve endings, or the nerve itself. A conductive hearing loss would refer to a problem at the level of the middle ear or the outer ear, impacting the ability of the outer or middle ear to relay information into the inner ear structures. A common type of conductive hearing loss would be like when a child has fluid in their middle ear. That would cause a conductive hearing loss. And a mixed hearing loss would really just be a combination of both sensory neural and conductive losses. So perhaps like an older individual that has had a decline in their inner ear structure and then has a perforation in the eardrum, they may have a mixed hearing loss. So as I stated, sensory neural hearing loss or inner ear type loss is by far the most prevalent, and that is related to the death of little hair cells or nerve endings inside of the inner ear structures. Their job is just to relay that information to the nerve. Unfortunately, that hearing loss is permanent at this point. We as humans cannot regrow our cochlear hair cells. Some species can, some species of songbird can, but we as humans cannot do that. There is some work to trying to learn to regrow those medically, but that's likely far off. So the right now, sensory neural hearing loss is permanent. So I also want to talk to you a little bit about the anatomy of the balance half of the ear. A lot of people, we all kind of realize we hear with our ears, but a lot of people forget that half of our inner ear, helps us have equilibrium. It keeps us upright. So I want to talk a little bit about the anatomy of that and how those structures work before we dive into the impacts of some problems with both the hearing and balance half of the ear. So on the balance half of the ear, you have what are called your semicircular canals. They're your head turn sensors of your ear. You have 3 of them per side, and they're at all different angles. That way you can correctly sense head rotation in all planes. And then you also have linear sensors inside of your ear, basically sensors that detect movement, like when you go up and down in an elevator or when you accelerate in your vehicle, movement in those type of planes. We call those your otolith organs. So the main function of the balance half of the ear is actually to give you stable vision when you move your head. So the way that works, if I want to rotate my head to the left and I want to stay focused on an object in front of me, my inner ears actually push my eyes to the right so that I am able to do that. If you did not have an inner ear, every step you would take, the entire world would bounce. And anytime you moved your head rapidly, everything would blur. So that reflex is quite fast and absolutely necessary for stable vision during movement. The second function of the balance half of the ear is what's called your vestibulospinal reflex. And it's really a reflexive postural control. It helps keep your head oriented over your lower extremities. It's really a combination of multiple reflexes below the neck. And then lastly, we have what's called our vestibulocolic reflex, or the head righting reflex. It's a sort of a minor reflex in humans, but it is the predominant reflex in the vestibular system for other species, such as birds. That's why I have the picture of the chicken there. And that's actually why chickens move their head as they're walking. That's how they orient themselves to space. they don't have much in the way of a vestibular ocular reflex, so they have to know where they're at somehow. But that reflex does help us with keeping our head upright. So I also want to go over some signs of ear disease that you should be on the lookout for. This may seem somewhat obvious, but if you have difficulty hearing, it could be a sign you have a problem with your ear structures. If you have tinnitus, or if you hear noises in the ears like ringing, buzzing, and that's nothing in your external environment causing that sound, that's likely a tinnitus sound, and that can be a sign of hearing loss or damage to the auditory structures. If you have ear pain, if your ears feel chronically stopped up or full, if you have discharge coming from the ear, or of course dizziness as well. So I want to go into some components of how your ears may play into the aging process, and perhaps some things you may not have actually thought of. So we do know that hearing loss is more prevalent as we age, but things you may not be aware of is that hearing loss is actually associated with higher rates of cognitive decline. Some recent studies show that hearing impairment is independently associated with a 30 to 40% rate of cognitive decline. So that's a pretty big deal. The physiology behind that, we think, is if you don't hear as well, you may socially withdraw. And if you're not stimulating your brain by exposing yourself to a variety of listening environments, it's like anything. If you don't use it, you lose it. So we do know that cognitive decline is significantly associated with hearing loss. Some other aspects you may not be aware of. Hearing loss is also associated with depression, particularly for those individuals with greater degrees of hearing loss. Likely from a similar mechanism. If you don't hear as well, you may withdraw socially. And we as humans are social beings. If you're unable to participate in the activities you would like to do, that can be depressing. And as you're all likely aware of, falls are a huge societal problem. But many people may not be aware that your ear can definitely contribute to falling. Falls are obviously problematic because they can lead to activity limitation, injury, or even death. Falls are actually the leading cause of injury-related death in adults over the age of 65. And we, as a country, spend about $50 billion on medical costs related to falls. So it's a huge problem in our nation and in the world. Something that's interesting we've learned in more recent years, we do know that hearing loss is associated with higher risk of falling. Recent systematic review and meta-analysis showed a nearly 70% increase in the risk of falling among older adults with hearing loss. And that's the same study showed with greater degrees of hearing loss, the odds ratio, or the likelihood of a fall, further increased. So more hearing loss, higher likelihood of falling. Now, perhaps that's multifactorial in nature because, there could be aspects of if that individual has chronic disease like diabetes, perhaps causing neuropathy in the feet, they may be more likely to fall. But it's very much an interesting association and correlation we're noting there. And tying back into cognitive decline being associated with hearing loss, we need to talk more about cognitive decline and falls. Those with cognitive decline are at a significantly higher risk of falling as well, with older adults with dementia showing 2 to 3 times higher likelihood of falling than their age-matched peers. Certainly pertinent. And interesting too, of course, this that we'll talk about here doesn't really necessarily apply to every individual person, but overall, when you look at individuals with hearing loss, particularly greater degrees of loss, they actually, just as a trend, tend to be less physically active. Don't know if that could be due to other medical conditions, perhaps impairing them. But back to that, if you don't use it, you lose it type saying. If you don't move your legs and your body, that can lead to deconditioning and poorer balance and mobility. and certainly hearing loss appears to tie into that as well. So I want to talk a little bit about the physiology behind, why might your ear and why might hearing loss tie into falls risk and maintaining balance. We as humans, our balance system is multisensory. We use information from our eyes or vision to tell us where we're at, as well as our sense of touch to the ground, and also the inner ear structures, the vestibular system that orients us to space. So there is the possibility of, as you develop hearing loss, that you could also have some declines to the vestibular system or inner ear balance organs. That's one possible theory behind why hearing loss may be associated with higher risk of falling. Um, Another theory that makes a lot of sense to me is cognitive load related. We only have so many cognitive resources to devote to everything we do in life. And if you have hearing loss, perhaps some of those cognitive resources that you would otherwise be applying to paying attention to where you're walking, you may be pulling some of those to trying to be more environmentally aware or straining to hear because of the hearing loss. And lastly, there's not a lot of data on this, but there is at least one recent study showing that auditory cues from our environment may also be important to maintaining balance, almost like echolocation in a bat. We may notice that when we're walking down a hall, the reverberation of our voice or those around us off of a wall can give us a redundant sensory cue that there's a wall next to us. So there may be things like that at play as well. We don't fully understand that as well, but it's interesting nonetheless. So I want to dive into concomitant or coexisting hearing loss and vestibular dysfunction or inner ear balance dysfunction. A lot of people don't realize the prevalence of inner ear balance or vestibular conditions. So the pie chart that you see there, you can see that vestibular disorders account for about 45% of all dizziness. And that's actually, regardless of clinical setting, that's a multi-study average across emergency room data, internal medicine, family medicine data, and otolaryngology data. So vestibular conditions are quite prevalent and account for the majority of dizziness. It's pertinent because 24% of people over the age of 72 report being dizzy. So dizziness is quite common. It also accounts for about 4% of emergency room visits, which is actually fairly high. So some of the physiology behind that. We do know that our hearing system declines naturally as we age, but it also appears that our inner ear vestibular organs may also decline as we age as well. There seems to be declines in the vestibular hair cells or nerve endings associated with age. And I found this interesting, especially the closer I get to 40, that vestibular function actually begins to decline at age 40. So that's obviously with each year after that, you may have further sensory declines as well. So it's very, very interesting. That seems quite early to me. Also, we don't fully understand this next aspect, but very interesting. We do know that if you stimulate an individual's inner ear that is 25 years old with a stimulus, and then you stimulate an elderly individual's ear with a similar stimulus, that elderly individual almost always will feel the sensation less, their perception of that vestibular stimulus for whatever declines associated with aging. And, perhaps that somehow contributes to falls risk with aging. We don't fully understand that, but that is something that's reported in the literature and something we see at a clinical level when testing individuals. So this is pertinent because vestibular disorders are actually pretty readily treated. The most common vestibular disorder is a condition called BPPV. It stands for benign paroxysmal positional vertigo. It's a condition where some crystals that are supposed to be in the ear get out of place. And that can lead to head movement induced episodes of vertigo or spinning of the environment. And that condition is actually readily treated for most people with a series of exercises. And, we can get most people feeling better in just a day or two with the correct exercise. Also, in the cases of other vestibular disorders where there may be damage to the inner ear structures, there are specific rehabilitation protocols that are oftentimes performed with physical therapy. It's called vestibular rehabilitation that can help minimize the symptoms associated with that deficit, while other inner ear vestibular conditions can be managed medically. Dietary modification medications. So, the question I'm sure you're all wondering at this point is, if we know declines in our ear function, are related to cognitive decline, depression, falls risk, does amplification help? We do know that hearing aids, may help in some cases. Hearing aids have been shown to slow the rate of cognitive decline, and should be recommended for those with hearing loss. There was a very recent multi-center randomized control trial that was published, and in that study, they found in particular that individuals that were already at a higher risk for developing cognitive decline, those with chronic conditions like high blood pressure, diabetes, lower socioeconomic status, less education, when they wore amplification, they exhibited a 48% reduction in cognitive change over a 3-year period. That's huge. Interestingly, in that study, the individuals that were at a lower risk for having cognitive change, so those without chronic conditions like high blood pressure, diabetes, higher education levels, did not see that same reduction in cognitive slowing with amplification use. So that obviously needs to be studied a little bit more, but that's very interesting and promising that hearing aids should be recommended. Also worth noting, consistent hearing aid use has been associated with a lower prevalence of depression, likely because that individual is not as socially withdrawn. They're allowed to participate in more of the activities that they would like to. And the relationship between amplification or hearing aid use in individuals with hearing loss, as far as can that reduce the risk of falling, we don't fully understand that, but there are some emerging studies on that, and it also seems to be promising. So the first bullet point that you'll see there actually references a quite large hospital-based study. They had 50,000 participants in it. And they actually found that individuals with hearing loss were 2.4 times more likely to fall than their peers with normal hearing. The inpatients that actually had hearing loss and wore hearing aids in that setting did not show any increased risk of falling. So that would suggest a somewhat protective effect from hearing aid use as far as mitigating falls risk in that environment. And the second bullet point there is actually referencing it's a smaller study. It's a it's a study in a physical therapy journal, but they found that individuals were actually able to stand twice as long on a compliant foam pad when wearing their hearing aids with their eyes closed versus without their hearing aids. So there does appear to be some sort of contributions from having appropriate auditory cues helping with our balance. I definitely need more data on that, but interesting. And I want to dive into as well some of the modes in which you can obtain amplification now. It's been in the news. We're having a lot of people come in talking about over-the-counter hearing aid options. That's relatively new. So traditionally, hearing aids were fit by an audiologist or a hearing aid dispenser. These devices are highly programmable. Many people don't know it, but hearing aids can actually be fit to prescriptive targets to be appropriate for someone's hearing loss. Programmable or traditional devices allow us to do that. Over-the-counter options are pretty new. I like to think of them like reading glasses for your ears. You've been able to go to Walgreens and get reading glasses for who knows how long for mild visual deficits. Over-the-counter hearing aids are made for people with mild to moderate hearing difficulty. That's the way they're marketed, mild to moderate hearing difficulty. They don't actually specify mild to moderate hearing loss. And they're more of like a self-fit type device or just a general overall amplification. So it's much less fine-tuned. But the benefit of that is it's a more affordable option for people with milder losses. And Deb is going to make these slides available to you all at the end. But I've tried to include some resources in here if you have questions or want to learn more about it. You can see I've got a link there to some frequently asked questions about OTC or over-the-counter hearing aids. And I mentioned a moment ago that programmable devices can be actually fit to prescriptive targets for someone's hearing loss. That's done through a process that's called real ear verification. That actually involves placing a small probe tube into the individual's ear canal. You put the hearing aid in on top of that, and then they're placed in front of a box similar to what you're seeing there. That box then plays speech or sentences to that individual, and the probe mic in the ear canal allows us to measure the sound pressure level at the eardrum to tune that hearing aid in for that individual's hearing loss and their ear canal acoustics. It is the gold standard way to fit a hearing aid, and unfortunately, though, there's no law that says that that has to be done. So unfortunately, a lot of clinics don't do that. So anybody out there that's interested in pursuing hearing aids wherever you go, I would ask them, do they perform real ear verification on their hearing aids? You're likely to hear better. Just food for thought there in an appropriate hearing aid fitting. And I've also included more information here on hearing aid resources. We talked at the beginning about the poor uptake of hearing aids for individuals that would likely benefit. I think some of that, there's some barriers as far as cost. But we are seeing in more recent years that some insurance companies are providing coverage. Here at Wake, we're about 50-50 as far as cash pricing for hearing aids versus insurance pricing. So we are seeing some moves in the right direction there as far as insurance covering hearing aids, which is great. Also, there's obviously cash pricing options. There's also some financing options out there. I know we work with a program called Access One, and they even offer interest-free financing options for people, which makes it way easier to to get into a device if you can split that payment up over time. Some resources people may not be aware of. There's vocational rehab. We also have a state program, the TEDP program. It's paid for by a state phone tax. And if you meet their hearing loss and financial criteria, they will pay for one hearing aid every 6 years. So that's a program we use quite often for people. There's also the VA. If you're a veteran and you have hearing loss, certainly worth looking into. And then I've included some additional resources there from Help America Hear and Hearing Aid Project. It's just got more information on there about other options that could potentially help get you into a device. I've also included some screening measures for hearing handicap and dizziness handicap. This would be maybe targeted more for if there are any providers out there, seeing patients or perhaps wanting to screen a loved one. This just gives you a better idea of the level of handicap that individual may be dealing with as far as their hearing or dizziness symptoms. And because we've talked about cognitive decline, I also wanted to include some links here for cognitive screening, information from the Alzheimer's Association, as well as the SAGE, which is a self-administered cognitive screen. So what are some key points here? So we know untreated hearing loss is associated with higher risk for cognitive decline, depression, and falling. So, treat hearing loss if you have it. Um, Associations don't always prove causation. You could probably associate ice cream sales with shark attacks, and it's not because sharks like ice cream. So you have to be careful drawing broad assumptions like that from the available literature. But when multiple studies agree on things over time, that is paying attention to. So, if nothing else, if you have hearing loss, treat it. You're going to hear better. And it may slow your risk for cognitive decline, may help with social engagement, decreasing risk of depression, and may help minimize falls risk. Um, be aware that hearing loss and vestibular disorders can co-occur and that vestibular disorders are actually quite common. Protect your hearing. Inner ear or sensory neural loss is permanent. So you want to keep what you have. So protect your hearing when you're around loud things and, live a healthy lifestyle. We do know some chronic medical conditions like just diabetes comes to mind, can accelerate hearing loss. So just live a healthy lifestyle, eat well, exercise. And then I've also included my contact information. I'll be available for questions now, but if anybody has any other questions and wants to reach out to me, I've included that in there as well. And that's all I've got. I've got the references here at the end too, which will be available if anybody would like to look at that.
Well, thank you, Dr. Workman. I have to add one personal element to this in that when my husband got hearing aids, to me, it was very obvious he didn't know what he wasn't hearing. So we live in a 100-year-old plus home in West End here in Winston. And when he had his hearing aids for the first time, he goes, I never knew that our floors creaked when I walked across them. And you think, how much are people with hearing loss, how much are they missing? Just the tiny little I love yous in passing from people or from children, just, children's whispers. So I would encourage everyone who can to get a hearing test. I did it because I wanted to know a baseline so that as I age, is my hearing getting worse or has it stabilized? So I'm going to go to questions right now, but I just want to stress that a lot of us don't know what we're missing until we get the appropriate hearing aids. So we've got a question here. Is it better to wear hearing aids during all waking hours?
Yeah, I mean, in general, we do advise, patients to wear hearing aids all waking hours, unless you're around something really loud. In that scenario, we would want you to protect your hearing. Most hearing aids are also not waterproof, so we would tell you to take them out if you're taking a bath, going swimming, anything like that. But under normal circumstances throughout the day, wear them as much as you can. What can happen? I mean, you're trying to teach the brain to adapt to having that level of amplification. And probably the worst thing you could do is don't wear any sort of amplification until you go to the noisiest restaurant possible. And then what you're doing is you're taking your brain from not hearing to hearing a ton, and it's almost like it's information overload for your brain. So it really is best to allow your brain to get used to hearing with amplification, adapt to hearing that way. Deb, I'm sure you saw it with your husband when he was first fit with hearing aids. I mean, we hear things all the time. Like, I didn't know my turn signals made a noise.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know my keys jingled in my pocket when I walked.
Right.
So it's important to adapt to things like that. That way you're not overwhelmed when you actually go to the more difficult listening environments.
Right. And again, the kinds he have even automatically tone down when he goes into just a moderately more noisy environment, so it's not blowing up his ears.
Correct. Yeah, most
Oh,
hearing aids have a built-in scene classifier that can detect ambient noise levels and change the gain settings in it. They can change microphone settings to assist you. We're even seeing some hearing aids now that have been taught with artificial intelligence to
wow.
better detect speech in certain environments, and it's actually kind of cool.
Yeah.
It's very interesting stuff.
Well, I sure thank you for taking the time to share what you know with us. I know we're probably going to have some more questions, but I'm respectful of everyone's, including your time. And so what we'll do is, just like always, I'll send out the slides, Dr. Workman's presentation, so you'll have all these great resources. And for now, take care. Please take care. Here in Winston, we've got an evening with wintry mix out there. So stay home, stay warm when you can, and make a date. I want to see you again on March 11th, right here. And until then, let's all live well so we can age well. So good night, everybody.